Good afternoon, everyone. We're at 2 o'clock, so we'll resume. Ms. Hilton, you had finished, as I recall. Fine. I'm going to come to Mr. Waring then.
Thank you, sir. I've got a bit of indigestion, actually, just from eating my sandwich quickly, so
that's what happens when we have lunch break, isn't it?
It's that coffee shop across the road. It's the Aeromint Rocky Road.
I haven't sampled that yet.
Commended.
So in going back, I'm not going back as far as Mr. Waters went, but going back probably an hour and 3/4, and it was a point, and it really was a bit of an observation on an unsubstantiated sideswipe by Mr. Corsier in relation to cumulative landscape and heritage impact that might arise from the highways that he referred to, that is part of ST15. And I just really wanted to note a couple of points there. The first one is that the link road that Mr. Corsier is referring to is a potential option, which was a potential and is a potential public transport link. That's explained in evidence and is also explained by the fact that in, I haven't got the reference now, I may have, because let's go back to my machine, but in the proposed modifications, it talks about it being considered. It doesn't talk about it being definitive. Second point is that we've explained in the evidence that there are other options. It doesn't necessarily, that public transport only link road could go through a different way, and that could be, the link could be via the A64. And the third point is, as we've explained in evidence, that through development management, the appropriateness of that link road could be disciplined through development management policies. So I just really wanted to confirm that point. It doesn't seem a very big point now, but at the time it did.
It's fine. I'm happy for it to be confirmed in that way. That's helpful. Mr. Langler, sorry, my eyesight.
That's quite right. I just wanted to very quickly say that, I mean, in response to Mrs. Markham's evidence or information, that I think I've already kind of covered our view in terms of the scope of Purpose 4, and that it covers the wider city and not just the walled city centre. I think all of the arguments in relation to the Green Belt are sort of encompassed within our hearing statement to the Stage 3 sessions. I did just want to pick up the point of, there's been sort of reference to landscaping and buffers around ST27. If ST27 was to be allocated and you know, come forward for development, we'd very much see that appropriate buffer being something that reflects the open agricultural setting that's currently in place around the city, reflecting the parkland landscape of the university campuses, which is to be celebrated rather than necessarily hidden behind you know, new vegetation. So we would very much encourage that whatever comes forward actually retains that openness rather than hides away behind a new sort of a landscape wall, if you like. And just to say that in terms of the changes that have been made to policy SS22 in that regard, we're comfortable with how it's worded within that policy, because it refers to an appropriate buffer rather than, you know, anything more solid than that, if you like. And also, obviously, with the reference to development briefs and master plans as well, there's opportunities for feeding into those.
That's very helpful, Mr. Langer. I was going to ask about the nature of the buffer and what your view about it was, because I've seen different representations about whether it should be like you say, a parkland buffer or something rather more substantial. So that's a really helpful clarification. I recognise we've gone on for quite a while, Mr. Elvin, Mr. Tucker, whether you want to chip in at this stage.
Shall I go? I've not got very much to add to what I've already said. In relation to Mr. Merritt's points, I reiterate the point I made earlier, that the position with regards to house prices within York lies outside of the City Council's control. And it's unfortunate, and we're doing what we can. So far as the loss of the 23% is concerned, well, we've explained that in our hearing statement and in Appendix 2. The problem with taking figures like that is it becomes an arbitrary difficulty rather than looking at the underlying reasons for it. And what the policy seeks to do is to address the underlying purposes of the 23% without being too prescriptive. That is to say, matters such as the preservation of character, heritage, efficient use of land, landscaping, and the like are all part of the policies, but without setting an arbitrary limit of it. I mean, there may, for the sake of argument, there may be parts of the campus where a much higher percentage is appropriate in all those terms. There may be parts of the campus where that percentage or even lower may equally, particularly in close proximity to heritage assets. The whole point is to provide a plan that is suitably flexible, but still protects those interests which everybody agrees need protecting. Thank you.
Mr. Tucker.
Yes, Mr. Elvin, as you probably expected, sir, has stolen my thunder. But the real point is that the 23%, actually it was 20% in the original policy, as Mr. Elvin and Mr. Linus's opinion. I don't know why I get the duff microphone.
There's another one there.
No, it's fine. I'm happy at that. Sorry, my roadie's just trying to assist me. Last seen with Iron Maiden. So back to reality. The 23% was acceptable in the context of that permission. It wasn't being purported by the Secretary of State to establish an all-time principle there afterwards. And what the revised policy approach allows is consideration of each individual application and whether it is appropriate in its context. And that's a more, how can I put it, more 21st century approach to such issues. Second point, just in relation to what Mr. Langlis had to say, obviously the wider and more extensive the buffer is, the greater the degree of net developable area. And that then perhaps does have a further impact on our point with regard to safeguarded land and indeed the likely deliverability of development on the site itself. I flagged those points up without repeating points that I've already made. And I'm really going to have to apologise to Mrs. O'Neill after this for saying...
Yes, I think you are now, yes.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Kusier, is your nameplate? Yep, go on.
Yes, sir. I wanted to come back to the points which Mr. Elvin and Mr. Tucker made against me. Can I deal with the question of remote learning, first of all? So we had a statement from the university that it wasn't taken, it does not feature in the, or remote learning students don't feature in the projections. It was slightly elliptical the way it was put, but, and so it probably wasn't so, because how the university has pursued this is that they've taken past performance and then looked at various trajectories of growth based upon that past performance, and that past performance didn't take into account remote learning because it didn't exist at the time in the previous 10 years. So going into the future, what we do know, because I don't think it's now particularly disputed, is because it's in any event in the university's own evidence, that nearly almost all the growth will be international students. I don't want to go back to that point. But if there is an option there of remote learning, and again the Vice Chancellor confirmed that, that is going to affect rates of growth going into the future, because many international students, at least for affordability reasons, will choose that option. So the whole way in which the university is putting it to you, so we say, is misleading. Remote learning will greatly affect the number of places required on campus. And it's the number of places on campus which you're considering, not the total number of students. So just taking Mr. Tucker's point on paragraph 20 of Secretary of State's decision, yes, Mr. Tucker is quite correct here. The Secretary of State was referring to very special circumstances. But, and here's a big but, the point I actually was seeking to make was that where the Council's own evidence establishes a site fulfills very important Greenbelt functions, and so you can take that from figure 3.1, you could take that from 59E, whichever source you want, but I don't think even the Council is disputing that. Then there is, and the Council say the need is so overriding, it should be allocated. Again, that's contrary to what the submitted local plan says, that the site is so important that it should never be allocated, whatever the need. But if indeed the need were to be shown to be so important, then a very full and proper exercise needs to be undertaken, or should have been undertaken, before it's allocated, to show there were no alternative sites. And so we say the Council haven't done that. The City of York, the Council hasn't done that. The University hasn't done that. Indeed, the need itself, based upon both the evidence of the City Council and the evidence of the University, is very uncertain going into the future. That's not the basis on which to allocate a site which fulfills very important Greenbelt functions. So just, which then goes on to the point of, I think the point Mr. Elvin tried to take me about where the Council's judgment. So I went through 59E very carefully with you because I wanted to stress the words which are used in there, such as unacceptable sprawl. The site would represent unacceptable sprawl. The fact, the importance given to this site in views from the A64. And so I agree, I have to accept that at the back of that document, it says that the site has potential for development in line with the local plan strategy. But just because the Council uses those words, that I say you as the inspectors have to consider the reasonableness of that judgment. Just the Council can't, if that were not to be the case, sir, then this local plan examination has little function. We say, based upon the evidence which is in front of you on 59E and figure 3.1, so we say that that conclusion is unreasonable. And so just picking up on the point which Historic England have just talked about, so a parkland setting of the type which I think Historic England are looking for would require a considerably more land, probably a great deal of the SC27 land, to create a parkland setting than a simply heavily planted conifer plantation of the type which I think the university are envisaging. And so just on that point, can I remind you again of evidence that the A64 at this point is 2 metres above the adjoining level of land on ST27. And to achieve effective screening, you would need some form of bunding, particularly in the short term. And so that figure is in various evidence. And just to pick up on Mr. Waring's point, we think the cumulative impact of the Great Separated Junction, the link road and ST27 upon this part of York is a major consideration for you. And so if that link road is not produced, and so I think it was the evidence of the council when we're discussing ST15 about its importance, there would not be a direct link between ST15 and the university. There would be a long route. You'd have to go up to the Great Separated Junction. You'd then have to travel up to the Grimston Bar roundabout. You would then have to go along Hull Road and then back into the university. That affects the attractiveness of that journey for people by public transport. It makes it considerably longer and more difficult. And so if you remember, the whole of the traffic modelling is based upon 25% of trips going to the university from ST15. And if that route is so unattractive, it really makes that figure, which we think anyway is unlikely for various reasons we'll deal with tomorrow, but it makes that figure extremely unlikely. Also, there may be other options, but I don't think anybody's actually discussed them at this examination, so I don't think you can put any weight on them whatsoever. That's all I want to say at this point, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Coursier. I'll come to you, Mr. Langland, next, because I think you wanted to respond directly to that point Mr. Coursier made.
It was just clarifying, in case I wasn't sort of clear, or I hope I was, but I think the point I was trying to make was that buffer should respect the parkland landscape of the university and reflect the open rural setting of the city. So it wasn't the parkland setting, it was the rural setting of the city in being open or largely open. And that's not putting any kind of distance on that. That's something very much to be determined, when we get to an application stage as to what, as the policy wording puts, an appropriate buffer. I don't think that's necessarily for this, for the local plan. That's all I wanted to say, really.
If I'm just to be absolutely clear, what you weren't saying was that any development of that allocation would need to have buildings placed in a parkland setting. What you were talking about was the buffer having a parkland quality, if I could put it like that.
Well, I think we've kind of covered within the policy that in terms of the development of that site, it should reflect the parkland landscape of the rest of the campus, so Campus East, but that the buffer between it should reflect the open rural setting of the city. So that may well end up being something that reflects a sort of a kind of a I'm trying to think of the sort of urban edge development where you may well have some tree planting, but it doesn't necessarily. What I'm trying to get, I suppose, the point I'm trying to get across is that a thick woodland tree belt or bund across that whole area would totally obliterate any kind of open rural setting that you currently have to the city.
Just wanted to be very clear about what you were saying. So
I'm trying to be, but maybe it's not coming across.
No, I understand.
I think what you're ultimately saying, though, is that that is something that can be decided through the planning application process, in your view.
Yes, that's correct, based on the policy wording as currently drafted within the proposed modifications.
And can I just chip in and say that that's entirely aligns with proposed paragraph 3.98a and the supporting text and the terms of the policy. As I said, we did make sure those issues were built into the policy.
And obviously it would be covered by the development brief as well.
Good. Ms Hilton.
Thank you. I'd just like to reassure Mr Langlands, because it won't be harming the open agricultural setting around York, because that'll be gone. It just won't be there. If you've got a link road that's lit, you've got potentially playing fields, potentially floodlit, then you've got ST27, there will be no agricultural open setting around that corner of York. So that puts that to bed. I just want to go back to focus on ST27 rather than the surroundings of it. I mean, I think it's clear that Heslington Parish is averse to ST27. We don't think it is soundly based. Mainly, it's contrary to CYC's own policies, and Mr Corsier has quoted several of the paragraphs and figures that we've also quoted in our hearing statement. CYC says it would not be an acceptable site for development in terms of its the process it's gone through, although it then finds a way to punch through and make it an acceptable site. We still don't agree that it is fully justified in terms of need. We haven't heard any evidence that has changed our minds. It's clearly contrary to the Secretary of State's ruling from 2007. Some people may feel that 2007 is another era, another age, but I can assure you that in Heslington Parish, that is only fairly recent time. Obviously, we've talked about the green belt, and one of the points I wanted to pick up earlier, which I forgot to, again, this is in Mrs O'Neill's hearing statement number 3 for this phase, paragraph 124. Or her company, I should say, is picking up on the narrow green buffer on the northern side of Campus East. That's between Badger Hill and Campus East, which runs adjacent to Field Lane. And it says it's surrounded by development on 3 sides. One side is Badger Hill, the other side is Campus East, and I guess the third side might be Kimberlow Hill shops. And so she says it doesn't fulfill the green belt purpose. But I thought one of the green belt purposes was to prevent urban sprawl. And that is the function, surely, of that buffer between Badger Hill and the built area of Campus East, is to prevent the two coalescing. We've talked already about where the green belt should lie in terms of the buffer around Campus East. And I'm not going to go over that again, but I hope that will be reconsidered. So instead of ST27, we very much hope that the University of York with CYC will explore other solutions. We really applaud what Mr Keyes has said about investigating what more could be done within their current estate. So that could be better use of existing buildings, building more intensively, as we've said, retrieving space from non-STEM businesses on the Science Park, relocating some of the enterprises away from the University of York site, and perhaps in the more distant future, but within the planning span to repurpose land which is currently leased out. For example, the sports village. It's got a large velodrome on it, which is very, very seldom used, for example. I suppose it all boils down to whether we're looking at what the university's needs are or what its wishes are. And we feel that it needs to demonstrate a far, far stronger case for the need for ST27 than we've seen so far. And just to pick up on the need for open space within campuses, I'm talking particularly of Campus East, because that is the one most concerned with ST27. You could make that into the lovely open parkland it is now and build all over the countryside. Or you could build far more intensively on Campus East and retain the real countryside, the unlit country byways and highways, which are already open and accessible to any staff or student members of the university who wish to go for a walk or exercise. There really isn't any need to add a lot of parkland into the campus. So in summary, we're really looking to CYC and the University of York to work together to respect the 2007 ruling and really to endeavour to do more rather than less to contribute to the well-being and rural amenities of Heslington's residents and the other local communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Hilton. We are jumping around a little bit, but I'm going to hear from Councillor Waters, and then I'll see what the response is. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Only briefly, as Islington Parish Council have quite eloquently said, if ST27 goes ahead, you're losing that rural view, you're losing that green belt value, and quite honestly, the landscaping and the bunding that was done in relation to Islington East is the type of screening that needs to go in alongside the A64, as I'm sure you'll see if you on your site visits, especially at night. The existing impact from lighting from the university's activities is quite shocking.
Mr Elvin, then.
ST27, of course, has been in the plan for some time and its various iterations, and as it's put forward today, is as proposed to be allocated in the Reg 19 plan. It's assessed in the sustainability appraisal in its various iterations, and you know by now the relevant audit trail in Appendix G and the detailed assessments in Appendix J, which go into all the various issues and the pros and cons of developing the site. The fact is that no alternative to meet the university's need has been identified. We have sought to place a discipline on the use of that site by ensuring that best use is made of existing land, but notwithstanding that, further land is necessary in order to meet the important needs of the university. We have sought expert advice in the form of Mr Keyes and others, as has the university. Fulford Parish Council, although they make a lot of points, their position is entirely unsupported by proper analysis. Mr Tucker's already mentioned this, and I've mentioned it before last week. But Mr Coursier makes submissions, but they're submissions made without any solid evidential analysis, because, with no disrespect to him, he lacks the expertise to deal with these issues. We have sought to analyse them. We have not approached the matters uncritically, which is why we're not in agreement, for example, over safeguarding. We haven't simply taken the university's figures and run with them. We have sought to analyse them critically and to give you a balanced view. The fact is, and I understand very well the concerns about Heslington and the loss of rural hinterland, but we have had to balance the various factors in setting the boundaries of the Green Belt, having regard to national policy guidance, and I welcome the clarification from Historic England that the matter with regard to the buffer is as set out in the draft modifications and that it's a matter for development management. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Alvin. Mr. Tucker?
Here we go. Couple of things. I agree with everything Mr. Elvin says apart from safeguarded land, and you have our points with regard to safeguarded land. Points don't get better by repetition, I was told a long time ago. I've ignored it, but I've still been told it. The two points, one I'm going to deal with, and the second of which I'm going to ask Lucy Markham to deal with, if I may. The point about online learning, our figures are emphatically net of online learning. It's not that our figures have some as yet unknown amount to be deducted from them. If the aspiration of the City Council and the strategy is to maximise online learning, then that is net of the position that we're putting to you. It's not that you are deducting figures, and that's emphatic on my instructions. In relation to the issue of the most appropriate way of treating the boundary, I'm just going to ask Lucy Markham to make a few comments in relation to that, but self-evidently our position is that that's not for now. That's for the development brief and or a planning application. The only real point that it may be relevant for is that if it becomes an extensive area, then that strengthens our point about the need for safeguarding. Lucy?
Yes, I wanted to make a point to respond to Mr. Langler's point about the parkland character of the university. The Register Park and Garden was historically characterised by parkland that was associated with Heslington Hall. But that's now been overlaid by a mid-20th century university landscape and campus. So it's not sort of historic parkland as you typically understand it. And in fact, there's quite a few bands of trees. The lake was created to deal with the drainage issues, and then the trees are planted along the edge of the lake. And also trees define the contours of the land. So I think that the landscape screening that's likely to come forward with an application with a band of trees would not be inconsistent with that character of the Register Park and Garden.
Mr. Waring, your nameplate's on its end. Did you have something you wanted to say? No?
I do, sir. And it really is just 2 points of clarification again, just to respond to Mr. Courtier and Heslington Parish Council. The public transport access route we've been talking about as being a potential. I think Mr. Courtier said that it was suggested that the only route that had been talked about was through that area. If Mr. Courtier had read our evidence, Appendix 10, Matter 7 statement, we talk in there under paragraphs relating to first bus. It should be noted that both bus operators have commented that bus routing via the A64 may be quicker for residents of ST15 to travel into York. Further work will be undertaken with bus operators and the university to produce the optimum combination of routing. So there isn't any predetermined route at the moment. And the policy itself, paragraph 3.64 of the proposed modifications confirms that. The second point that I really wanted to confirm and clarify was a point that the suggestion that the route will be lit if it is going through that area. That is a planning application matter, sir, and it's one that hasn't yet been determined.
Thank you, Mr. Waring. Last name, please, is Mr. Courtier.
Thank you, sir. I think I can be fairly brief, hopefully. Just dealing with this question of the buffer, because it is relevant to you. It does go beyond the detailed policy wording, because it goes to the amount of development which can be secured on ST27 against the harm which the development of that site will cause. So the HIA, I didn't read this out, but that is based, and I'll take you to page 10 on HT7, it talks about screening and buffering. Obviously, that's what the HIA is based upon. And that's obviously, those words imply a barrier which you cannot see through. And that seems to be, that is again what the University of York have proposed in their master plans. If there are clearly two other options. One can go on you can have some form of parkland setting, a parkland landscaping along that buffer. But that would be well, in our view, that would not be effective in screening and buffering views, or even making the views particularly attractive. So, because within that sort of, it would have to be very much wider than a buffer planting to actually achieve the same effect. If you were to go along Historic England's view, I think, as I understand it, is you do something along the you sort of respect the character of the agricultural practices in the area. Not certain how you do that, sir, but if you would, but that's again because you're dealing with a road that's 2 meters elevated above the site. Basically, you're just getting open views into a building area. And so you are just, ST27 is simply replicating the mistake which hopefully you've driven around the ring road now, you see has happened at Clifton Moor, where development was allowed up to the outer ring road and has done substantial damage to the character of York in that area, and I think that view is expressed by the York Greenbelt Local Plan Inspector at the time in his report. So whatever you do here is the cumulative impact of the Great Separated Junction, potential access road, and ST27 will substantially damage the character of York in his southeastern quadrant. We don't think, sir, it has been properly justified. Indeed, the public benefits are a great deal less than the long-term harm it will cause to the primary purpose of the Greenbelt. And we are talking about a substantial part of York, so we're not dealing with one little area, we're talking about a substantial part of York on its most important approach road. Just looking if there's, I think that's as much as I want to say at this stage, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corsi.
I just have a question for Mr. Tucker and Mr. Elvin, and that is whether or not the area of agreement within the statement of common ground is based on any preconception of what the buffer might be. Does it make a difference?
Can I start off? I think the answer is no. The buffer, as shown on the plan, is very large. It's about 100 metres wide. If one was to go down the tree planting route, I seem to recall Capability Brown used to operate on the base of 12 yards in terms of the width of tree belts around places like Warwick Castle Gardens, where we can get 10 of those into that width. If it's going to be an area of clumps of trees to create a quasi-parkland area, there's enough room. If it's an area to give some impression in terms of agriculture, there's some room. So no, it doesn't have any preconceptions, but there's a huge amount of opportunity given the land that's identified in a 100-metre standoff off the A64. What we're not doing, and I love that Mr. Corsia has become an advocate over the last few years, what we're not doing is proposing to have a band of conifers along the side of the A64? That seems to be a brave suggestion that was our case, but there we are.
Nothing to add.
Is there anything either of you want to add in terms of what we've just heard? Mr. Tucker?
Thank you, sir. No.
In which case, I think if there's... Oh, Miss Hilton, sorry.
Just a point of information, really. There's a couple of times people have mentioned yourself and Mr. Buckley coming on visits. I just wondered, how does that work? And you're very welcome to come and visit Heslington Parish at any point for ST15, ST27, ST4, OS10. Have I left anything out?
Well, generally speaking, visits in association with a local plan examination would be done unaccompanied, but I think we accept that some that we're going to be doing here will need to be accompanied. And certainly when we go around the university campuses, it would help enormously if we had a guide and we're taking around.
A guide with a buggy would be exceptionally helpful.
Well, certainly a guide with a buggy who's instructed to say nothing and to do no more than simply go where you tell them to go, and we'll arrange such a person who's unconnected with anybody involved in the local plan process, as you would expect. Literally a driver rather than a guide, perhaps.
That's the kind of thing we would envisage. But yes, of course, we will be visiting all the sites in one shape or form, either accompanied in that way or on our own, on an unaccompanied basis, using public rights of way and so on and so forth. That's the general way it's done. So yes, we are looking at some quite extensive site visits because of the inner greenbelt boundary and so on and so forth. All the sites, yes, but in due course. And we have to, be clear with everybody about when that is likely to take place. And I'm not sure we have a date as we have dates.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to publicise dates. What we don't want is crowds of people following us around, frankly. What we want to be able to do is to go out there and see the things that we need to see and be able to discuss that between us as we go. In fact, we have already been through parts of Heslington and along Low Lane. And some parts of the surrounding area, but it is quite a big area, hence us requesting a buggy from Mr. Tucker.
From my client, sir, I think.
If you're not careful, he'll take you up Hadrian's Wall tomorrow. Wednesday.
Good. Is there anything else we need to deal with today? We're back tomorrow to deal with 9:30 to deal with transport and air quality. I'm going to be doing that on my own because Mr. Barclay's not going to be here. So that's the way it will be done tomorrow. 9:30, unless there's anything else. Thanks, everyone. That's been most helpful. Till tomorrow.
Thank you, sir.